It's fine in them, though, isn't it?
Yeah, sad, isn't it? Once they were all big stars, household names. Now they're forced to scrape a living as best they can. Humiliated, forgotten, cast aside like a half-chewed liberty bodies. We'll seek them out. Wherever they are, we'll find them and put them back at the top, where they belong. Hang on, boys! We're coming for you! We remember! We won't let you down!
Hello, I'm Andrew.
Hello, I'm Lisa.
Welcome to episode 48 of...
Round the Archives.
Lisa, do you have a correction?
I do have a correction. I must apologise profusely.
Yeah.
But in the Keeping Up Appearances article, I said that Queen Henrietta Maria was married to Charles II.
Right.
This, in fact, is incorrect. She was Charles II's mother. She was married to Charles I.
You were one Charles out.
I was one Charles out.
At least you weren't two Charleses out. So.
Well, there hasn't been another Charles, so...
Well, give it a while.
Well, maybe. But yes.
But we've been busier than ever, haven't we?
We have. If you've managed to keep up with all the things that you've released since the last time, you're a better person than I am.
Yeah, we've been doing a podcast a week and making appearances on other shows.
Yes.
So don't forget to catch up on the Round the Archives in Conversation releases.
Mm-hmm.
We're also on the Shy Life podcast several times.
Mm-hmm.
And we're also on the Exton Moss Experiment.
We are. We're sorry.
Why are we sorry?
Because we're everywhere at the moment.
Well, we're just spreading ourselves far and wide, aren't we?
Yes.
But now we're going to kick off with a tribute to Tim Brooke-Taylor by asking whether...
The goodies rule okay.
Goodies, goody, goody, yum, yum. You need to help me. Oh, you know I'll understand. Oh, but when you got to the end, you ever want to be your friend. Goody, goody, goody. Should have different feet. Why? You should have always seen me. Take a man of your life and it's in any time. Hi, hi, hi.
Good afternoon, Lisa.
Good afternoon, Andrew.
I have in my hand a piece of paper
Do you?
from 1977.
Okay.
It says, "You are invited to our Jubilee celebrations barbecue and dance at the St Giles Estate Club on Monday the 6th of June 1977, 9 p.m. to 1 a.m, licensed bar.
Wow.
Adults £1, children 50p.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wonder why it's got adults crossed out. Was that your ticket?
That was my ticket, because I was a child, so I was only worth 50p. But this was the Queen's Silver Jubilee celebrations we did in our village.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I got cross, well, or at least a bit narky, that I had to go to a fancy dress party dressed as a robot
Yes.
on Tuesday the 7th of June.
Okay.
And why did I get cross? Because I was going to miss Goodies Rule OK.
Okay.
Which apparently was always on the telly in the mid-70s.
Yes.
As the first transmission for it is the 21st of December 1975 on BBC Two at 7:25.
Yeah.
And it says, "Goodies triumph in the world of pop, help put Britain back on top. They sink a queen and float the pound, then battle with a famous hound."
Okay.
And then there was a repeat on the 25th of February
Yeah.
1976
Yeah.
where it doubled its audience, basically getting about 13 million.
Wow.
And then the showing on the 7th of June 1977 was at 4:25 on BBC Two when I was dressed as a robot.
Okay.
I came second though, so that was all
That's
right.
all right then.
Yeah. But I do love Goodies Rule OK.
Yeah.
Of the specials, I think it's my favourite.
Okay.
I do prefer it to Goodies and the Beanstalk.
Yeah.
There's just a bit more going on. So how many times have you seen it? Only once or twice, possibly?
About twice, I think, yes. Yes.
But the thing about the Goodies, and I've been thinking about this, is that the three lead characters, and Nick pointed this out recently,
Yes.
that he always regarded me very much as Graham Garden.
Okay.
And himself as Tim Brooke-Taylor.
Okay.
I don't remember him making too many patriotic speeches.
No.
But yeah, I always identified with Graham. Mm-hmm. But in Last of the Summer Wine, I always identified with Clegg.
Okay.
Who I sort of see as being Tim in Last of the Summer Wine. Yeah. If Compo is Bill, and Foggy or Blamire or Seymour, that was it. Oh god, I'm going to get letters from Bob Fisher now. Being the sort of Graham sort of,
okay,
especially with Seymour because he was an inventor.
Yes.
You see.
Okay.
But let's go through what happens in this one. Mm-hmm. And I said there is a lot to note down.
Yes. We made notes.
Yeah, it's got a special title sequence.
Yeah. With stuff in that's not in the actual episode.
There's a few bits that aren't, sort of takes and things like that. But yeah, it's the only episode or story for which all the clips are actually from the filming of that production.
Okay.
We should say, of course, the giant Dougal immediately starts appearing in the title sequence after this because it's such an image that people remember. But we start off in 1961 with Pathé News and Barry Cryer doing a voiceover.
Yes.
And we see where Cliff Richard and Cilla Black and Pete Murray and the Bay City Rollers.
Who weren't babies in 1961.
Were they not?
Well, no, considering they're sort of early to mid-70s.
Yeah.
And they're obviously in their 20s by then.
Yeah, all right. Well,
they definitely weren't babies.
It is a gag.
Yes.
But at the Cavern Club, we have the Bootles.
Yes.
Don't we? Who are our heroes with sort of wigs and things on. Bill's got a bit of a nose, hasn't he?
Yes. Yeah, strapped on nose.
But yeah, they're doing their sort of best Beatles impression, aren't they? How do you think they get away with it?
It's not bad.
Yeah.
I mean, it's meant to be bad, but it's a good impersonation.
Because they're Don, Saul, George, and Bingo, aren't they? The other way, George is just a dummy.
Yeah. Well, they didn't have enough people, did they? So.
Yeah, they're sort of booed off stage, basically, and the Beatles come and pick up all their bits. Yeah. I love the way that all their songs are attributed to Graham Garden and Bill Oddie and Tim Brooke-Taylor, if you look on the on the sheets. Mm-hmm. But yeah. So cut to 1968, when I was born. Yes. Where they're the confirmed bachelors. 1970, they're the extremes. And noting all these singing and dancing routines, how unhappy Graham is.
Yes, he looks more unhappy in the extremes one because he's wearing a dress.
Yeah.
In the other ones, he just about pulls it off, I think.
What, the dress?
No.
1974, they're the three, and they don't even find out what they are before they're pelted. It's all sort of cabbages and things, isn't it? And by 1975, the Goodies are on Skid Row. But
it's probably the same cabbages as well.
Yeah, it probably is. But I like the thing where sort of, I think Bill says we're ahead of our time. You know, we're not appreciated at the moment. Yeah. And we're trying to do something new and original. And I think there's a bit of sort of foreshadowing there that sometimes the Goodies were written off just as a kids' show. There is that thing, and when you hear them in interviews, they will say about that. But they have lasted. We have got the DVD release, and we recently got the full interview disc, didn't we?
Yes.
Which was very interesting to see.
Yeah.
I like the dig at John and Eric.
Yes.
From Python, who are dressed up as Gumbies going through bins, aren't they? But the theory is that people prefer cheap imitations to the real thing when it comes to entertainment. Meaningless gimmicks. So Graham's got a big sack, hasn't he? Which is full of props, including Donny Osmond's teeth, the Bay City Rollers trousers, Elton John's glasses, Kojak's hair, and the Womble's feet. And the Rubettes cap, isn't it?
Kojak's hair?
Yeah, Kojak's hair is a bald cap.
Oh, right, yeah.
But Bill does a...
Yes. And Alvin Stardust.
No, it's Graham actually does a...
Yeah, Alvin Stardust's glove.
Yeah.
So somebody gets to do some pointing.
And Lindsay DePaul's dress as well. I noticed that the dress changes because Tim's wearing it at first with the cap, and then later on Graham's got it on the drums, isn't he?
Yeah.
So they hold a concert, and the only people allowed in the audience are police.
Yes.
I like that. So they do Wild Thing, And Tim's rather good at doing that, isn't he?
Yes.
I think he enjoys that.
Mm-hmm.
But the police end up storming the stage,
Yes.
don't they? Then I like the thing where the goodies are all in the top 10 on Top of the Pops.
Yes. It's just various different pictures, isn't it?
Some of which are actually from their appearances on Top of the Pops, and some are staged. But basically, the goodies are raking it in, but Britain's sort of economy is in trouble, and the pound falls to a new low. But on the good news, the goodies to get OBEs at a Royal Garden party. Now, we should say about Bill and his OBE.
Yes.
Because
at the audience thing where they launched the DVD set, he was wearing his OBE, wasn't he?
Yeah.
And he said, well, what's the point of having it if you don't wear it?
Yeah. It doesn't actually look like the OBEs they get in the show, do
well,
they?
Well, that's probably because when they did it, they didn't know what OBEs looked
They
like.
were just big discs with OBE written on
it's
it.
actually sort of cross, isn't it?
Yeah. But it's raining, isn't it? And
Yes.
it all ends up underwater at Ruislip Lido.
Yes, which we've been to.
Did we? Yeah. When did we go there? Then?
Well,
years ago.
A few years ago now. It's when we visited Elaine and Keith, and we went for lunch, and then we had a walk around the grounds.
All right. And no bits of leftover goodies, no OBEs in the bush or nothing. But Sheila Steeple's doing the voice of the Queen.
Yes.
Yeah. So but the goodies are going to be nationalised. We should say about the palace being underwater. There's a lovely shot where they've done a sort of composite shot of the palace in the distance, and they're in a sort of rowing boat, aren't they? That's very nice. But it's the goodies' duty to cheer up everybody in the country. So they've got to bounce for Britain, and I love this sort of meaningless sort of make people feel happy. You got any comments on the bouncing segments?
There is one bit.
There is one bit.
Yeah, you wouldn't do now. But,
what's that? The lady.
The lady's chest. But yeah.
But Michael Barrett is on Nationwide and he's bouncing, isn't he? Yeah. We've got to give points to him. For being very game to be silly.
Being involved.
But the trick is he does it absolutely straight, doesn't he? He's really believing in it. So industry is brought to a standstill, and the PM gives up, doesn't he? He sort of jumps off a balcony or something. So we have election special introduced by Wogan.
Yes,
I like that.
Yes, Terry Wogan.
Terry Wogan, because you've got the bouncing party and the waltzing party and the Max Walling party.
Yes.
Do you like Max Wall? You're not bothered, are you?
No, not really.
But there's also a party of dummies who are the standing party.
Yes.
And they soon up getting elected. Because I think nobody sort of knows what their policies are, do they? It's sort of nothing, really.
Yes.
So we cut to the town crier. Who's that?
It's Norman Mitchell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who says basically there should be no larking about allowed.
Yes. No fun.
It's an offence to enjoy yourselves, and this will be seen over by the mirth inspectors. And that's quite a nice scene where they sort of gallop into the town square.
Yeah, that's very well done.
Yeah.
Because it's sort of I was sort of looking at the costumes, and because one of them's got sort of like a big helmet on, hasn't it? But the other ones are quite round-headish. And of course this all sort of is very similar to Oliver Cromwell and his banning anything that was vaguely good. So Christmas and plays and sport.
Well, that's the thing. Although this is a very silly plot, it's still got connections to all sorts of things. That's what I like, spotting all the allusions and things like that. So all pleasure and diversion is banned, and there's shots of like footballs and comics being burned on pyres, isn't there? And basically, you got to keep Britain gloomy.
Yes.
But meanwhile, in Sherwood Forest. The goodies as 3 Robin Hoods.
Yes, all in Lincoln Green.
Yeah.
Or green.
Present a show to an old couple who live at Dunchucklin. I wonder if it was called that before the mirth inspectors came into town. It probably wasn't. So we get a load of silly. It is basically like the good old days or Will Tappers at this point, as we get a load of slightly below par acts, don't we?
Yes.
As we get some rubbish acrobatics. A barrel organ, some knife throwing, which sort of escalates with Bill like throwing spears and shooting machine guns and a bazooka. There's a magic act where Tim is sawn in half, and his feet end up on backwards.
Yeah, they put his feet back on the wrong way, don't they?
You asked me about the music in that,
Yes.
and we should mention Andrew Pixley's wonderful book,
Yes.
which will give you every musical track. But the one you were thinking of, it's used in Captain Fantastic in Do Not Adjust Your Set. So yes, you have heard it before.
Yes, I thought I had. Just couldn't work out where from.
But yeah, the lady is sort of really enjoying it, isn't it? And her husband's trying to shut her up in case they get into trouble.
Yeah, in the end, he sticks a plaster over her mouth and a bag on her head.
The one that really made me laugh is Graham doing the balloon animals. Because you've got all the silly noises when they sort of fly off.
Yeah.
Bill has another go at Wild Thing, and then a policeman appears out of nowhere again, doesn't he? And then they sort of stand on this rotating thing that goes round, and there's sort of showgirls with them waving. I don't know where they come from, but they've sort of dug a thing in the ground and covered it in grass.
Yeah, like it's a
turntable.
A rotunda kind of thing, isn't it? They call it in the theatre.
Is that what it's called?
It's what it's called.
But yeah, prohibition is brought in. So we've got the hootleggers who operate at Joke Easies and presenting illegal entertainment. And this is after the St. Valentine's Day custard pie fight, isn't it?
Yes.
And that's one of those shots I could never work out in the title sequence where it comes from.
All right.
As they come on as like sort of gangsters.
Yeah.
And they've got the custard pies in like the violin cases and things like that. And so yeah, if you're wondering where it comes from, it's just a brief shot in this episode. But yeah, they're looking for once famous entertainers, and there's a rumour that Eric and Ernie are in town.
Yes.
But they want to put them back at the top where they belong, because they've all had to take up sort of menial sort of tasks, haven't they?
Yes.
Because you've got Tommy Cooper as a traffic warden, but he's still got. I like the fact he's still got his fez on.
His fez on, yeah.
You've got Doddy as a sweet sweeper.
A road sweeper.
And I said a sweet sweeper.
Or a street sweeper.
Yeah, he doesn't go around sweeping sweets.
Well,
unless they got dusty.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that Tony Blackburn is utterly ignored.
Yes, they pull up and drive off again, don't they?
Because Tony Blackburn turns up in the audience for their thing. And
he does. And you have to admire the fact that he's quite happy to have the Mickey taken out of him.
Yeah. But although the government now topples, everybody's forgotten their act.
Yes.
So you've got all these people that... well, some of them are shot from behind, but you do get Eddie Waring, Patrick Moore and Sue Lawley for real, don't you? But I love the way that sort of Tommy Cooper's going, just like that, just like that. Ha ha ha. And Doddy's sort of like he's Arthur Mullard, isn't he?
Yeah.
By Jove, Mrs. By Jove, Mrs. And Eddie Waring's doing Frankie Howard, isn't he?
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Yes.
But yeah, Patrick Moore and Sue Lawley have sort of swapped their thing. Ernie Wise gets a slap, and his wig jumps up in the air and lands on Kojak.
Yes.
And then you've got Eddie Waring's voice coming out of Patrick Moore's face, haven't you? About if you look at the sky at night, what you can see.
You see Hulkingston Rovers or whatever it is.
But yeah, this scene is very much mid-70s entertainment, all in one room, isn't it? And you know, I just love the fact that they can throw in so many recognisable faces, a lot of whom are still recognisable even today. That's the great thing. There's not many people in that scene that you're thinking, who are they?
Possibly Eddie Waring, maybe.
Yeah, maybe, but most of them are still, you know, still in the consciousness today. So the entertainers' party is in power, and it's time for the state opening of Parliament. Except the only entertainers left are the puppets, aren't they? So cut to Nationwide.
Yeah, you love this bit.
And this is my favourite bit, but you know, where you've got the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary being interviewed, who are Sooty and Sweep. And
I love Sweep.
And the Prime Minister wants to play his xylophone. The way he smashes it down on the desk. And Michael Barrett puts it away, and then it gets smashed on the desk again.
But that's what Sooty used to do.
I know, it's exactly right.
And I I love Sweep as well because it's just squeaky.
You had a Sweep.
We've got a Sweep here somewhere. Yeah.
I had a Sweep somewhere. He had a little bulb inside.
Yeah, it's got a little squeaky bulb when you squeak it.
Yeah. We'll see if we can get the Sweep out.
Well,
do you know where he is? We'll see if we can find him. But yeah, today in Parliament, and you've got all the puppets there. You can see a clanger.
Yes, it's Major, isn't it?
I don't know which one it is, actually.
It's got a pink thing on it. It's Major, I think.
Possibly.
And the original Major.
And Paddington.
Yeah, it was a rather scrappy looking
A rather rubbish Paddington, but this is before Paddington actually starts on BBC One. Because Paddington starts in January 76.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, that's nice. And we have to point out this is filmed at Parnham House, not Athelhampton, as everybody seems to think it was.
Well, that's still in Parliament, isn't it?
But yeah, Parnham House is used as Chequers.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, the goodies basically break into Chequers. Mm-hmm. There's a Punch and Judy.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, in the cabinet room, and I love the way that suddenly the puppets stop talking when the goodies come in.
It's like walking into a pub where nobody knows you.
Yeah. And they're really sinister all of a sudden.
Yeah, it's that real Western moment where the person.
Yeah.
Well, we did it once in York, walked into a pub and everybody looks. Where you walk in a Western where the stranger walks into the pub and everybody turns and looks and the atmosphere changes. But yes, they are very sinister. Yes.
So I would point out there are two puppets that are obviously missing here, and there's no Basil Brush.
No,
because apparently he was asked.
Yeah.
But apparently Basil Brush doesn't work with puppets, according to Graham, anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And Emu's not there as well, and that was in the draft script as well. Okay. So
perhaps Emu's too difficult to do.
Rod Hull was going to be attacked by his own emu or something like that. So yeah, then you get the puppet attack scene.
Yes.
Naughty old Hector.
It's just like people throwing them.
It's mayhem, basically. Yes. But you've got Graham doing his because he's so good at that sort of physical comedy, Graham, isn't it? Mm-hmm. The way it sort of goes through his throat.
Yes.
And you get the thing from Vision On sort of whizzing around.
You get several things.
Yeah, there's a pair of them. They've been breeding. Yeah. Pinky and Perky raise the alarm.
Yes.
Yeah. And then you get a giant Andy Pandy, Looby Loo and Teddy.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I love the fact that Tim's brought his makeup bag with him at this point. You don't think about it during the episode. No. It just seems obvious.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, clearly Tim's always got a makeup bag on him.
Just in case.
Yeah. So they disguise themselves as puppets and have to sort of hold their arms up as though they've got strings. Graham just sort of kicks the dirt and gravel, doesn't he? Because he doesn't want to play.
Yeah.
But yeah, then there's a thing in the bins, isn't there? Which is,
I think it's meant to be Oscar the Grouch.
Well, it's a cross between that and the sort of Cookie Monster or something.
Yeah, because it's blue, right? Because Oscar's green and Cookie Monster's blue.
So yeah, it's a sort of Sesame Street Muppet Show thing, isn't it?
To get away with it, they've made it
they've
sort
had
of
to change it,
indiscriminate. Yeah.
And it gets eaten by Tim. There's just a bit of green fur hanging out of his mouth. And there's a sword fight with Bill and Ben.
That's really well done, actually.
Yeah.
I can't imagine how hard it was to do that.
Because Bill and Ben have got all these big, thick strings holding their arms up. And slowly during the fight, the strings get severed and they fall apart until all that's left is one arm holding the sword, isn't it? And Graham sort of... Is it Graham or Tim just pushes it into the ground?
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Bill's having a fight with the Wombles.
Yes.
And I do get the thing that Bill especially wanted to fight the Wombles because they were a successful pop band doing silly music.
Yes.
So I wonder if there was some sort of
rivalry
there. And a really silly gag, but it does make me laugh as little Weed pops up out of a thing. Weed! And just gets chopped down immediately. No. We're not putting up with that. And then into the final set piece.
Yes.
As they think they've defeated all the puppets and slowly round the corner in the distance.
Yeah.
And I love the way it's such a long way away.
Yeah.
Here comes the giant Dougal to run them all over.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's Peter Day on special effects.
Yeah.
But I get the feeling most of the effects assistants are inside it, lugging it around.
It along,
Because it's really it moves smoothly enough.
It does,
But I can't imagine how much it weighed.
No.
And, how it was... Is it on casters or what? How's it done?
I don't know. Because I would imagine it must be, because if you were just walking, it'd be a bit more like the Merca, which is a bit bumpy, isn't it? Or Dobbin.
But then you've got the giant Zebedee as well, which perhaps isn't quite as well made.
No, but
yeah,
I spent all the money on the Dougal.
yeah.
So.
But again, that's sort of boinging up and down in the
Yeah.
trees, and Bill gets in a lot of sort of trouble with it.
Yes.
And eventually, the house is destroyed as the Dougal and the Zebedee crash through the walls.
Yes.
And again, there's great model work
Yeah,
here, both for the
spectacular.
destruction of the house
Yeah.
and the shot later when the house is destroyed and the goodies are standing sort of by the gates.
Yeah.
It does get mentioned on BBC News, but how on earth the BBC News cameras managed to get the shot of the of the Dougal coming through the wall? It's not as though the camera crew were there at the time.
Yeah.
So you then get Corbett Woodle. I knew you said Corbett Whittle. I'm thinking of Private Whittle.
Something different.
Yeah, Corbett Woodle with Sue Lawley's voice.
Yes.
Who says, "I'm sorry, I'll read that again." As there's a coalition government of all the main leaders at this point.
Yes. So you get a shot of
Jeremy Thorpe, Margaret Thatcher, and Harold Wilson. Yeah. Who are sort of rendered as puppets, aren't they? Yeah. And then the credits roll, and just as you think it's all over, you get the goodies depicted as puppets being operated by Jim Franklin up in the sort of gallery or somewhere. Although I must point out that joke was actually done in Vision On a few months beforehand in the episode Wood, where Pat Kiesel and Sylvester McCoy, or Sylvester as he is, do a little puppet show as puppets. Being operated by themselves, whose strings are then cut by Tony Hart, whose then his strings are cut by a big hand that comes in, which is either Patrick Dowling or possibly Clive Doig. I just wonder if the goodies saw Vision On and thought that's a good gag. We'll
borrowed
use
the
it.
idea. Yeah.
But as with Vision On, there's just so much being chucked at the screen in this episode because it is slightly longer, but I think it really justifies its length, and it does hold up. And people remember the giant Dougal, but forget about all the other clever stuff that's going on in this one. So.
Well, it's like the kitten in Kitten Kong.
Yeah, that overshadows everything, doesn't it?
It's that one image of the kitten on the post office tower and squashing Michael Glassball.
Yeah.
It's what sticks in people's memories.
But it really is one of my favourite episodes of Goodies. Let's just briefly talk about Tim generally, shall we? Because you said that you don't really remember Tim so much from the Goodies.
No,
it's from other things for you, is it?
I think the first thing I saw Tim Brooke-Taylor in was Me and My Girl, which is the Richard O'Sullivan sitcom.
See, I don't know that at all.
And
not really.
It's, and I obviously I'd like to see it again at some point. Yeah. But it's. I probably knew he was in the Goodies, but
you didn't really know what it was.
No, and I mean I'm too young to remember this because this is like 1975, so I was only 3 at this point. So I'm not even sure when I first saw the Goodies. It might have been with you actually.
I might have shown you my Goodies.
So
yeah.
Because I honestly don't think that I'd seen it before then. Yeah. But I mostly remember Tim Brooke-Taylor for that and for doing the voices in the Banana Man cartoon with Graham and Bill.
Because again, I mean, the Goodies, wonderful though it is, you do forget that Tim's sort of done a lot of other stuff as well sometimes. Oh, yeah. And I think it's worth remembering his other work. But I just wanted to do the Goodies this time because it is just so good. And it's just weird that I've got this bit of paper from something that happened the day before one of the repeat transmissions. It's very odd. In terms of Goodies merchandise, I've got a few of the books, but I'm just so glad we finally got the complete set on DVD. So if you haven't got it, now's a very good time, I think, to add it to your collection.
You can now get everything because obviously the network have re-released the BBC Goodies and with the LWT series as well in a box set. So I mean, we've got them separately because we already had the the LWT stuff. But I mean, I think this episode particularly, it's not a typical Tim episode because there isn't any of the normal kind of stuff that he gets to do where he's very, very patriotic. I mean, he is patriotic in this. You get the bit with the Queen, but normally you get at least one speech about how great the country is and that sort of thing. And he's sort of Union Jack waistcoat and all that stuff that you remember. and his baked bean ads and all that sort of stuff, and it just shows his range.
Yeah.
I think, I think he was a little bit sort of overlooked in the goodies, because you've got Graham's sort of mad scientist and Bill's anarchist.
Yeah, I think Graham and Bill, as a kid, those are the ones you sort of focus on more than Tim, perhaps. Yeah. But, coming back to it as an adult, you can just see how damn strong he is.
He is, and he's very...
And that's the thing. It's such a good balance that you've got the three of them.
Yeah.
That one or two of them can go off and do a mad thing, and then the other one or two can oppose them.
Yes.
And that's why it really works.
And to be fair, it's normally Graham that's going off being a dictator or a mad scientist or whatever it is, like with the post office and that sort of thing. So
that triangle, I think, really works in a sort of dramatic tension when you're trying to get a plot going and things like that. It's sort of important to have all three, and they've all got very distinct characters that allow you to drive the story. So. And
it wouldn't have worked without Tim.
No, absolutely not.
Tim balances the other two.
Yeah. Oh no, it's very carefully worked out. That's the thing. So
yes, do yourself a favour if you've never seen any goodies and watch some.
So yeah, goodies were all okay. I think they definitely do.
I think they do.
Okay.
All
bye
right. Bye.
Thank you, Lisa, for doing that.
Thank you, Andrew, for doing that.
Oh, at least we agree.
Yes.
One extra thing that I've just noticed is that when Tim, Bill and Graham are on film doing the bouncing party, handing out leaflets, there's a bloke in a sort of shop doorway on the right of the picture who's got a film camera.
Okay.
A little 8mm job. So I reckon he's a member of the public filming the filming.
Oh, okay.
So I just wonder if that film still exists somewhere.
Okay, it's in somebody's garage.
And I wonder if Goodies fandom knows about it. And if they don't, it's our present to you.
Yes.
Anyway, now Paul and Toppie return to look at
The Twilight Zone.
Hello, Around the Archives people. It's me, Paul the Shy Yeti from the Shy Life podcast. I'm here again with my friend Toppie Smellie from the Smellcast and Matinee Minutia. How are you doing, Toppie?
I'm well. Thanks for having me back.
Oh, well, no. Well, thanks to Andrew and Lisa as well. Now, this time we're going to talk. It's kind of possibly going to be a two-part chat, but we'll they'll be in different episodes. So we're going to talk about the Twilight Zone today, but I'd also like us to talk about Night Gallery another day soon. But we'll just take one series at a time. All
right.
So, the Twilight Zone. When did you first see the Twilight Zone?
In the 70s, it was something that channels, our three major networks during the day or late at night would play to fill in time. If you were a station out there and you wanted something that would probably pull in people to watch, Twilight Zone was a really good bet. And so, for example, I remember one summer it was on every day at 12:30 in the afternoon. And, it was summer and just every day I'd be watching it. Of course, it was far ahead of when I was even born. So that's a part of, TV that was before me.
First season was 1959, and it ran for 5 seasons until '64. So I mean, the whole of the series was black and white, but I've bought the Blu-ray very recently, and I've been watching some season 1 episodes. And I know you're a great fan of black and white TV, and I have to sometimes be in the mood. But with the Twilight Zone, you don't notice. It just suits it, and it doesn't look. It's the quality so crisp, and that even if you had a problem with black and white, which you shouldn't, it's just perfect for Twilight Zone.
Twilight Zone has kind of a timeless quality, and I do think the black and white sort of keeps it somehow. It's timeless.
But I've been watching quite a lot of old films on a channel called Talking Pictures, which is over here, and I've been watching quite a lot of black and white films. But some films from like the late 50s or even the early 60s, they really do feel like like they're from their time. But I didn't find watching the Twilight Zone, like, I didn't think, oh, this is the 50s or this is the 60s. It manages not to date. Maybe some of the episodes will, or certain sort of things about society or things that maybe they're playing on the jukebox in an episode or whatever might date it. But the stories sort of do still feel quite sort of relevant, and they've rarely been bettered, I would have thought. Although saying that, I was looking, and of course we won't be covering these revivals, but there was an 80s revival which ran from 85 to 89, which I think I may have seen some episodes of, and that there was a revival between 2002 and 3, which I don't think I saw at all. And then there's a third revival, which I think is happening this very minute, which began in 2019. So I don't know if that means that anthology shows are sort of coming back round. I know I've sort of heard people sort of say, as far regarding like short stories, that they used to be really popular. And at the time of the original Twilight Zone, a lot of those stories were perhaps adaptations of existing short stories, but short stories sort of maybe went out of favour a bit from the sort of 80s onwards. But I've always liked, from the writing point of view, I always enjoy writing short stories.
And, a lot of people think, the Twilight Zone invented anthology storytelling. And of course it didn't at all, but it took advantage of that format to present a completely different story, completely different cast every time. And of course, radio, I dare say that Rod Serling was certainly grew up on radio dramas, and one thing radio had a lot of was anthology radio series. They had bucket loads of them. Yeah.
I've been listening to sort of a few of those sorts of things myself over the autumn that I didn't even realise, existed.
So we should talk about Rod Serling, who I don't think the first season he actually showed his face, but from then on, his visage was cemented with the Twilight Zone, and certainly his voice was as the opening and closing narrator of every episode.
Well, the weird thing is the Blu-ray version that I've been watching. I'm actually seeing the episodes in a way that I've never seen them before, because not only do they keep some of the adverts from the time, but you do see Rod Serling, but it's like he pops up sort of when after sort of before the titles run, sort of saying what's coming next week. Right. I've never seen that on any time I've seen it on TV or even earlier DVD releases. So I think
in my head that was typical. What may have happened is for getting in commercials. It very well could be they edited that out just to give another minute of commercials.
Yeah, and also something I'd not seen before was that there was a pilot episode which I think you do see him in again at the start in the way that it would later become. I think then they must have sort of decided no, that didn't work, and then later reversed that decision. But it's fascinating to think that they've kept some of all this stuff in the archives, and it's perhaps only emerging now in this form.
Could be. I mean, I've certainly never seen Twilight Zone. Well, that's not true. I mean, when I look at it on Netflix or wherever, that must be an unedited version. So I don't know. But Rod Serling had made his reputation prior to Twilight Zone, and he was writing for a lot of live television 1-hour dramas. Did some really long remembered and revered scripts for various networks and their shows. So he was very well known as like a top-notch writer. And I dare say that when CBS picked it up, I doubt they would have if Rod Serling hadn't been the writer.
In fact, I'm looking at the Wikipedia page for the first season, and the first 7 episodes, every single script is written by Rod Serling, including most of the ones that I've watched recently. Where Is Everybody, which is like one of those ones where a man appears and he's the only person around. One for the Angels, which is involves an angel. Mr. Denton on Doomsday and the 16mm Shrine. They're all sort of episodes that he wrote, and it was only even looking at the list of episodes when you get to a lot where like there's quite a few that are based on short stories by Richard Matheson, but then the teleplay is done by Rod Serling.
Rod Serling definitely molded the template for the show in such a way that he was certainly curating scripts from other writers that sort of would have that little twist ending, that little bit of at the end that the show was famous for.
Yeah, funnily enough, I mentioned Richard Matheson. By later in season 1, Richard Matheson seems to be actually writing those early ones. They're based on short stories he'd already done, which Rod Serling adapted. But later on, it looks like Richard Matheson perhaps wrote his own scripts.
Yeah, he was he jived with what Rod Serling wanted. And Rod Serling, this was his baby. He really wanted it to work. He put everything he had into it to the point of sheer exhaustion. And so once it got established, he said, I think maybe for my own health, I better start having other people write this, because he really did write himself ragged doing a weekly television show of the caliber, that the scripts for Twilight Zone was. So more and more he relied on other writers.
One of the episodes I watched, Mr. Denton on Doomsday, has Martin Landau in it, and there was a commentary that Martin Landau had recorded. So I guess even though the Blu-ray is quite a new release, I think some of these things probably come from previous DVD releases. So although Martin Landau is no longer with us, he'd recorded commentary, and he said, because I believe he was in like the 3rd episode, and I think he was in one of the very last episodes 5 years later, and he said that you could tell that the 5 years of sort of dealing with TV executives had sort of really worn Rod Serling down.
Yeah, in fact, you'll find he wrote about it often. I think one episode, Next Stop Willoughby, where there's this close up of a mouth shouting at an underling, "Push, push, Willoughby," and ordering him to work harder, and all this guy, wants to do is get off on a train at some quiet place where he can just rest and not be so harassed. And that was the theme of a lot of Rod Serling scripts.
And the seasons of Twilight Zone, they weren't short by any means. The first season had 36 episodes. I think pretty much all of the seasons had, season 2 was 29 episodes, season 3 37. Season 4 is weird because it was hour episodes, so there was only 18. Mm-hmm. Season 5 was 36 again. So
yeah, that's when the seasons were long. By the mid-70s, your typical hour-long drama had like 23 episodes a season. Mm-hmm. But 36 episodes, woo. Yeah, I mean, that's quite a schedule.
Yeah, I think as you say, it's sort of in this, because even looking at series, when I did my article on Bewitched, the early seasons of Bewitched were sort of at least 32, and then by the time the series was coming to an end, it was down to a more manageable 24. Mm-hmm. Although by the time they were doing those later seasons of Bewitched, they probably had so few ideas or were reusing things because they'd been doing it so long. So it probably wasn't an easy 24. It was probably, oh my goodness, what are we going to do to fill 24?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one thing as a writer, Rod Serling, and you could see it in many of his scripts, wanted to comment on civilization, human beings, societies. And networks kind of didn't really want controversial stories about those things. And it was hard to sell like a really good story that was ripe and juicy because the networks would say, well, this is too controversial. We can't do this. And Rod Serling knew that in a format like this, if he just disguised it a little bit, is maybe something leaning towards science fiction or fantasy, that he could easily write about the kinds of heavy subjects he enjoyed writing about, and he knew and he did. He the network's like, oh, it's a story about spaceships and outer space. Woo! Well, I guess, but there's actually a very deep theme that perhaps the network's executives just went over their heads or something.
Yeah. So, moving on to season 2. Now, we were talking a bit about this before we started recording. This is the season that has some episodes that were recorded on videotape as part of as a cost-cutting exercise. But there was only...
Right, yeah. So it was done on film.
Yes, usually. Yeah.
And then some executive type, and this is exactly the type of person that Rod Serling was not terribly fond of, said, well, let's just do this, I know, on video, and it'll cost us less.
Luckily, there was only 6 episodes done that way.
Oh, was that all?
Yeah.
I knew it was short-lived because it was just not... I mean, people weren't used to that. They were used to film, and I think they got a lot of complaints, and they gave up on that.
Luckily, one of my favourite episodes is called Eye of the Beholder, which involves a character having an operation on and having bandages around their face for the majority of the episode, and you only sort of see what they look like at the end. And luckily, I don't know why that one stuck with me. I think it's because it was one of those twists that really kind of affected me.
Yeah, that was a grade A level twist. at the end.
Yeah. So thank goodness that one wasn't a videotape one. That one is a film one. So because it would have been a shame to have for that to have had that condition. But yeah,
well, just before we leave the video aspect, you and I I'm both fond of Dark Shadows, and of course, when Dark Shadows started out, it was black and white video. I love the quality of black and white video. However, we were watching, well, to call it a negative would be not correct, but Dark Shadows had been saved in particular by the producer, Dan Curtis. And I think when you're watching the video episodes of Twilight Zone, you're watching kinescopes. And that's why it has a very harsh quality to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it does. It just, and it looks. So I remember probably back in the 90s when I first saw a couple of those video episodes. I was kind of like, well, this is just weird. It doesn't because it's so few episodes. It just doesn't sit.
Yeah, and a kinescope, for anyone who doesn't know, is just they would, have the video screen playing the video, and they would wheel up a film camera, and they would take a movie of the video. That's a kinescope.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things about the Twilight Zone is I think about a lot of times. When people describe the Twilight Zone, they say, Twilight Zone is sort of sci-fi, and maybe if they mention Night Gallery, they mention that's sort of more horror, which with Night Gallery, that is true. Pretty much all of the stories are supernatural or horror. But Twilight Zone has episodes that are far and beyond just sci-fi. I mean, there are one or two, and one of my favourites we'll come to later is definitely more of a horror one. So I think Twilight Zone did dip into more than just the sci-fi genre and fantasy. It was probably broader.
Much broader. It had a good mix. When they were curating what they wanted to show in a season, some were very humorous. It was just all about the humor. Some were, serious. Some were, total science fiction. Some were melodramas. Yeah, a great mix.
Mm-hmm. Are there any episodes that, like, you've always sort of particularly enjoyed, or that stick in your?
Yeah, so many of them. Certainly, the ones that most people mention. Because they are so good, they've certainly left their impression on me. Like, okay, any episode with William Shatner. I'm there. Any episode with Burgess Meredith, I'm there. But I love whatever that one with Shatner where he's on the plane and there's a gremlin. Yeah, I love that episode where they're at a diner and there's a fortune-telling machine. Mm-hmm. Love it. And I love Burgess Meredith's episode where he's the guy that survives a nuclear blast, and he says, "Oh, I have all the time in the world to read," and breaks his glasses.
Yeah. And then we mentioned Bewitched earlier. There's an episode from season 3 with Elizabeth Montgomery, which was shown in September '61. I believe she doesn't speak for the whole episode. And because she that was before she did Bewitched, but she was quite well. Just read a biography about her. She was quite well known by that stage.
I don't recall Elizabeth Montgomery. What was the plot of it?
The episode is called 2. She's a female soldier wearing a tattered uniform stumbles into a deserted city.
Huh. Interesting. Agnes Moorehead, of course, who was also on Bewitched, she played Samantha's mother. Yes. The episode on Twilight Zone that she was in, she also never uttered a syllable, a recognizable syllable.
Yeah, it says the episode relies heavily on the music, and there's very little dialogue throughout.
Yeah. The Agnes Moorehead episode, definitely a favorite of mine. I remember when I first saw that one, it was, just long after I had been watching Twilight Zone, and I guess I'd just never seen it, and I was really, that wowed me when I saw that one.
There's a lot of, still lots of sort of stories by Richard Matheson, even in season 3, and they do a version of I Sing the Body Electric by Ray Bradbury. They still keep to the format of sort of, 25-minute, half-an-hour episodes.
Right.
Up until the end of season 3. And then you get to season 4 where and I'm still not quite sure why they decided to do this thing of doing hour episodes for that season 4.
And then they went back to half an hour.
Yeah.
Is that what happened?
That's right.
Yeah, I think that was, I really doubt that Rod Serling would have said, yes, please, I want to write hour-long episodes. Again, a network decision. Paul, I remember reading, as famous as Twilight Zone is today, and as much as it lasted 5 seasons, I'm pretty sure I read that it was never particularly super highly rated. It never achieved the audience in its day. Now, am I making that up, or do you recall anything about?
No, I'm not sure. I know from that side. There's no sort of mention. Sort of.
It was
one of those things that has. I mean, I don't. I'm not even sure when it was first shown in the UK, whether it was shown sort of in the 60s or a lot later, or quite. It's one of those things. I'm sure someone listening would know where to look to get that sort of information. But that does sort of interest me. It's like all the shows that you and I have talked, the American shows we've talked about. When we talk about Wild Wild West, I don't actually know when it was first shown in the UK. I know Star Trek. I don't think Star Trek was even shown until about 1970 in the UK. I might be wrong, but I know it was pretty much finished, or had finished, by the time it first got shown.
Yeah. So you would say, like, you were how old when you ran across Twilight Zone?
Well, yes, I was going to share my first experiences. We're talking about the mid-ish 1980s.
Oh God!
Yeah, well, it was shown at that point. It was being. I'm sure since it's been, was just a particular period of when it was shown. I was old enough. I didn't have my own video, because by the late 80s I had my own video and I could set what I liked, what films I liked. You used to find. I mean, there was only 4 channels in the UK, but I'd always look in the newspapers to see if there were any horror films or anything like that. But I think Twilight Zone was probably a little bit earlier, before I had my own video. And I remember asking my mum if it was okay to record Twilight Zone. And I knew the name Twilight Zone, but I didn't really know, to me, I was probably 10, 11, 12 or something. I knew of it, but I didn't. It seemed very adult and very sort of. I remember when I first saw the Avengers, around the same time, it was on like at 9 or 10 o'clock, and I was allowed to stay up to watch it, because my parents obviously remembered it and they knew it was probably okay for me to watch it. But I sort of had an inbuilt reverence towards Twilight Zone, and I can still remember the first episode that I videoed that first time I set the video, and we'll come to that in a moment, because it was a season 5 episode. But yeah, so I was probably it was just amongst all the different programs that were repeated at perhaps midnight or 2 o'clock in the morning, and that's certainly where I discovered Night Gallery as well. That was, I mean, when we talk about Night Gallery, but I suppose it's okay to mention it, but they used to chop Night Gallery into little bits, because sometimes an episode of Night Gallery would be 1 story or 2 stories, or or sort of 3 stories and then a little 5-minute one, and by the time I saw it, they were chopping it up and just using it to fill space where they had like a 5-minute space at like 3 o'clock in the morning or something. So it wasn't until I got the DVDs with Night Gallery that I actually saw it in its proper form. But
yeah, I know we'll talk about Night Gallery some other time, but I'm much. In fact, I know I haven't seen all the episodes of Night Gallery, and I was never compelled to watch it as I was Twilight Zone, although I certainly saw some episodes. It never, I don't know, maybe it's because it was color, maybe it was an hour long. It seemed strange and never as interesting as the Twilight Zone.
It'll make for a good discussion because, spoiler alert, I prefer Night Gallery, but only partly because it's horror and partly because it's that early 70s color.
Yes, it's
I really love that sort of like the fashions and the kind of garishness and the
yeah.
But
that's right up your alley.
I think we'll talk about that next time. But
yes,
but season 4, this season with like 50-minute episodes, still has Richard Matheson writing a lot of the stories. Rod Serling's sort of writing. I don't know. Just glancing at the titles, I don't know how many of these are. If you were going to take the top 10 episodes of Twilight Zone, there is one called Printer's Devil, which is a Burgess Meredith one. I remember years ago now, a friend of mine lent me some tapes with season 4 episodes on. So I remember watching a lot of them and not really enjoying them as much. But there were 1 or 2 that did work for me, and unfortunately, I couldn't tell you which ones they were from the titles. But I think it's worth watching. It's worth watching because it's still the Twilight Zone, even though it's a different.
Yeah. The scripts aren't as tight because they didn't need to be. They had 50 minutes to fill, and to be honest, I'm not very familiar with the hour-long episodes because when I was watching it, it was syndicated, and I would gather the package that networks or TV stations would get was a half-hour slot, and I bet you the hour-long episodes were not in that syndicated package.
Mm-hmm. And also, they didn't even start the previous series ended sort of in like the summer of '62, and they didn't come back until the January of '63 because it almost wasn't a full. It wasn't a full season. It just ran from January to May. I almost wonder was there a hiatus whilst they worked out what was. I'm sure it's been written about, but I don't have the facts in front of me now. But
I don't either. I did just remember one of the weirdest ones that was vividly burned into my memory. I don't remember the title, but it takes place inside a small apartment that seems to be in a high-rise, and it's hot. And it's hot because something's happening to the sun. I forget what. It's either the Earth is moving closer to the sun, or the sun is going supernova or something, and it's just boiling hot. And there's stragglers that are in this apartment building, who are neighbors who are there. And for some reason, this lady hasn't left her, and she's just deliriously hot. And what a weird, that had a mood and I mean, so vivid. Does that one ring a bell with you?
It does, but I can't sort of place which season it belongs to. But the weird thing about they made that change to our episodes, but then for the final season, I don't know that they even knew. I don't know that they even knew it was the final season at the time. They go back to the old format, and the final season I'm sure that there'll be people who sort of can evaluate this season's the best season, that season's the best season. But season 5 does have some of the, does have some really famous episodes including the one you mentioned, Nightmare at 20,000 Feet.
That was Richard Matheson, I think.
Yes, it was. And it was a William Shatner episode, of course. Before we say goodbye to the listeners, it's this season that happened to be showing the first time I saw Twilight Zone. And I think they showed 2 episodes. I vaguely think they showed one called Probe 7 Over and Out, which was sort of about a crash-landed spaceship, I think. Mm-hmm. And it has Richard Basehart in, although I hadn't seen Voyage at that time. But I think I was aware that he was somebody. But the episode I really remember from those 2 episodes was one called Night Call.
This Elva Keene lives alone on the outskirts of London Flats, a tiny rural community in Maine. Up until now, the pattern of Miss Keene's existence has been that of lying in her bed or sitting in her wheelchair reading books, listening to a radio, eating, napping, taking medication, and waiting for something different to happen.
Hello? I'm sorry. I didn't hear. The thunder. Hello? Who's on the line?
It's basically the idea that like a telephone line falls down in a graveyard and this lady starts getting messages, phone calls. That was much more horror-y, supernatural. So perhaps it wasn't a typical Twilight Zone episode, or at least it certainly wasn't science fiction-y, but it was probably appealed to me as a growing horror fan. Mm-hmm. And stuck with me so much that I can remember 35 years later or more.
Yeah. There were some creepy ones. What your description of that episode reminds me of the episode of the little girl. I think this was a videotaped episode. Mm. The little girl has a toy phone and she speaks to her dead grandmother on it.
Well, that's the thing. It probably is almost a remake of an earlier episode. But if you see the remake first, then it works just as well. It's and looking at this, Night Call was another Richard Matheson one. So. Mm-hmm.
I think when, if for some bizarre reason, folks listening have never watched much of it, first of all, that's hard to believe. But second of all, what's fun about it is that it's eminently, rewatchable, but that's not the word I'm looking for.
Like a binge what?
Oh, thank you. It's eminently bingeable, but also for people who love old TV, it's super fun to find all of the actors, that come through. Clint Eastwood, Robert Redford, Charles Bronson, just to name a few, and of course all the other people that would later go on to probably have a regular TV series, or just our faces, names, and that's another really fun thing about it.
But it looks like according to Wikipedia, that Night Call was originally supposed to be transmitted around the time that JFK was assassinated.
Okay.
But although it wasn't shown in the end until February 1964, so whether it got bumped down the schedule. I'm not doing an advert for the Blu-ray that I've just bought. I'm not getting any commission. But one of the things that made me decide to buy the whole pack, because all 5 seasons in one pack on Blu-ray, was that I think it was like, certainly in the UK, it was about $50 for the whole thing. And I think there were 150 something episodes. So that's like silly money. I mean, we're paying 50 cents or whatever, or 50p an episode. It was just like, well, okay, I kind of really have to,
Oh, certainly.
Yeah.
I'll tell you one thing. I mean, if there are a lot of episodes that have commentaries from either a director or a writer or an actor that was involved, I'd really love to see those.
Certainly, the season 1 disc that I started watching, I think every single episode had either a commentary or some extra, or those weird adverts that Rod Serling had recorded, sort of related to next week's episode. There's so many extras. If you're watching the episode, then you're watching the commentary, you're getting two different. It's like having two different things, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Did you know that Rod Serling spent the latter years of his life right here where I live?
In your house?
That's my house. Not quite. He had a house, a very, very nice house on the lake.
Yeah.
And his widow remained there for many years. There were two reasons. One, that it was a beautiful area where Rod Serling could relax and get away from Hollywood. And also, he taught writing here. So at a little famous, semi-famous place of learning that specialized in TV, movies, and radio. So he was a teacher here and lived here and enjoyed this area.
I don't know, and again, I'm sure it's easily find outable. Next time when we talk about Night Gallery, we will have this information for you listeners as to what he did between Twilight Zone and Night Gallery, because Twilight Zone finished in June '64 and Night Gallery didn't really start getting going until '69, I think.
I know one thing. He wrote at least one treatment, or the final treatment, of Planet of the Apes.
Mm-hmm.
And there you go, Planet of the Apes, famous twist ending. That was very Twilight Zone-y. Also, he was doing a lot of narration.
Yes.
He used to be the narrator for all the Jacques Cousteau specials. And so he was doing a ton of voice work.
Next time, listeners, we'll talk a bit more about that, but we will also move on to Night Gallery. So we'll get our pens and paper and art, and we'll see if we can draw you up a beautiful article, which we can sort of work some sort of sinister story into.
Exactly. With a twist ending.
Yes. Well, Toppie, thank you very much for talking to me about Twilight Zone. As we found when you're talking about whole series, you're just sort of picking moments that are particularly personal that you liked. There was so much more to explore.
Oh yeah, worth watching, folks. Yes, definitely.
Yep. Well, we'll be back. Bye bye.
This is the Marionette Theater, historic Marionette Theater. It's a lovely turn-of-the-century movie house that was originally a venue for vaudeville.
We are here tonight because we have a love of movies and television. Go ahead and talk about what was going on in the world at the time of this movie.
Why did you choose this movie?
Oh, I feel like I'm in the police station and the hotlight's been turned on me. Okay, explain yourself.
Toppie Smellie, DJ Star Stage, Matinee Minutia, live first and third Fridays at 9 p.m. Eastern on Univoz.
Many thanks to Paul and Toppie for doing that.
Indeed, there will be more coming up from them, not necessarily together though.
Yes, well, we can have them together, we can have them apart.
We can.
If you'll pardon the expression. I'm sure they wouldn't mind either way.
I'm sure they wouldn't.
And now we're coming to the end of the episode already. So it's fewer articles, but longer ones.
Yes.
So thank you to everyone for listening.
Yes.
And we'll be back.
Part.
We'll be back soon with an conversation and episode 49, of course. But now to round off, Martin looks at
Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea.
Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. Starring Richard Basehart, David Hedison, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea.
These days, the four big Irwin Allen productions of the 1960s, Lost in Space, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, The Time Tunnel, and Land of the Giants, are rarely looked upon as being quality television. Don't get me wrong, they looked great, they looked expensive, they told cracking weekly adventure stories, but somehow they failed to be at the cutting edge, relying instead on the tired old sci-fi tropes of 1950s post-war pulp. Somehow, whilst certain other shows of a similar vintage are considered to be great examples of whichever genre they represent, the Irwin Allen productions are often thought of as outmoded, old-fashioned, or just plain silly. Nevertheless, as kids we lapped them up. My personal favourite was the submarine one, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, based upon the 1961 movie of the same name, starring Walter Pidgeon and Robert Sterling in the roles which are played by Richard Basehart and David Hedison in the TV series, and reusing the sets, plots, and both model and footage made for that film and other Allen movies to create the weekly adventures aboard the super submarine Seaview, a beautifully designed craft with manta ray wings, Cadillac tail fins, and 8 massive impossible pictured windows made of transparent Herculite in the nose that gave it a spectacular sea view, and which opened up the otherwise claustrophobic interiors magnificently. Stock footage would feature prominently throughout all of these shows, to save both time and money, of course, and sometimes shaped precisely the story that was being told. David Hedison's previous appearance in Allen's movie The Lost World, for example, meant that one episode could use scenes from that movie in order to tell that week's story without too much effort, this time featuring Captain Lee Crane. The first year of Voyage, dating from 1964 but set several years in the future, was filmed in black and white and overall looked rather grittier than later seasons and dealt with more adult stories of espionage as the crew of the Seaview battled Cold War shenanigans and evil organisations bent upon the destruction of the free world in much the same way as Spectre did in the Bond films at the time and Thrush would do in The Man from U.N.C.L.E. at around the same time, not forgetting the ever-present threat of the rise of communism. In later seasons, the stories would become more fanciful, if not downright wacky, as the influence of other types of shows like Batman started to gain popularity and the 60s became ever more swinging, and the conventional white-bread militaristic zeal of the po-faced gung-ho crew of the Seaview became less fashionable. Year 2 would bring fewer bow windows, inconsistent model shots, stories shot in gloriously vibrant colour, and the Flying Sub, one of the greatest aircraft/submarine designs ever to excite the minds of a certain generation of children. Year 3 brought a bit of a downturn in script quality as the espionage and spy adventures were replaced by more bizarre threats like werewolves and aliens, and the crew would face cancellation with their upper lips truly stiffened in 1968, and would then sail into television history with no chance of returning. The first episode was broadcast in America on September the 14th, 1964, when I was less than 2 months old, so you may wonder why I have quite such fond memories of the show. Well, obviously, it sometimes took British television a few years to discover and broadcast these stories, so they started to appear on our screens when I was at a much more impressionable age, the sort of age where someone might, for example, buy you an annual tied into a television show, or donate one at the office in a, "oh, I thought your kids might like that" kind of a way. Anyway, however it came to me, I still have that annual on my shelves, vandalised ever so slightly with my biro in that "but the 8 windows don't match the 4 ones in the episodes I'm watching" manner that obviously used to bother me. And on the front cover there's a transfer of Zebedee from the Magic Roundabout perched on the submarine, as somebody must have bought me a set of rub-down transfers at some point, and I would have been looking around for places to do the actual rubbing down on. Voyage obviously appealed to the tiny vandal in me, as it was the logo, in that iconic wibbly-wobbly lettering, that inspired me to try and recreate it in blue biro on the white headboard of my bed when I was still far too young to know any better, a tiny act of vandalism, I must add, that I never repeated. The other reason that I remember the show quite so vividly is, of course, because my big sister loved it, or at the very least she particularly admired David Hedison when she was also at a significantly different impressionable age. So, it remains one of the few shows that I have vague memories of us watching together in those far-distant one-telly-in-the-house days. The pilot episode, 11 Days to Zero, written and directed by Irwin Allen himself, was made in 1963 and filmed in full colour, but broadcast from black and white prints, and, as it should, serves as a reasonable introduction to the crew of the Seaview and the types of adventures they were likely to be having. For the purposes of this article, I decided to watch that unaired pilot from the DVD set rather than the broadcast version, although there's not a great deal to differentiate the two other than that glorious colour, which would vanish for a year but resurface later on, and that the unaired pilot on the DVD still has the series title sequence stitched onto it, rather than the one-time only captions made for the actual pilot, which still upsets some fans. And, as is Alan's way, you are hurled into the action pretty much from the off in an episode that manages to display several of the popular tropes of the genre of a significant number of submarine movies in its 48-minute runtime. There's a dive to below crush depth, a depth charge attack, and even a battle with a giant octopus in the course of the episode, all of which, of course, were sequences that featured in the original movie, cut in wholesale, but woven together, at least for the moment, to tell an entirely different story. The plot of the film would inevitably be revisited in a later episode, but for the moment we're telling a whole new story. Sort of. So that viewers couldn't claim that it's just a rehash of the film recut for television. That said, the film could be said to be a little bit overlong and slowly paced, and perhaps it isn't the greatest submarine movie ever made, although it made a few quid at the box office. One of the criticisms often levelled at the Irwin Allen productions is that he would often substitute action for actual characterisation and emotion, and it's a fair point. This bunch of guys, and guys, it is all guys, are not the most emotive lot. Even Del Munro's petulant Kowalski is painted in the broadest of strokes, and it is in the moments when they try and engage with some kind of backstory or contrived conflicts that the script suffers most. Still, that's not what we're here for, really, is it, guys? Let's get on with the action and leave the actors to try and find their moments of character wherever they can. Anyway, the episode itself opens and immediately shows the documentary roots of the filmmaker by starting with an enthusiastic voiceover which tells us in the most gung-ho manner about the public image of this mighty weapon we will come to know as the Seaview.
This is the Seaview, the most extraordinary submarine in all the 7 seas. Its public image is that of an instrument of marine research. In actuality, it is the mightiest weapon afloat, and is secretly assigned to the most dangerous missions against the enemies of mankind. In command of the Seaview, Captain John Phillips. And in overall charge of scientific projects, the creator and builder of the fabulous ship, Admiral Harriman Nelson.
And to help us work out where we are, that carved out of solid rock, 500 feet below the Nelson Institute in Southern California, there is a secret base housing the Seaview that few men know about.
This is the Seaview's top secret submarine base. It is carved out of solid rock and is located on the Southern California coast, 500 feet beneath the famed Nelson Institute of Marine Research. Few men know of its existence, and fewer men even suspect its purpose.
The disembodied voice also introduces us to both Admiral Nelson and Captain John Phillips. But thankfully, the mighty voiceover doesn't hang around much after that, despite having already outstayed its welcome. The Admiral and his captain are heading off to an important meeting of the Full Council of something or other, which is made up of a lot of elderly grey-haired military gentlemen who seem to be sitting around running things everywhere in those days, often while smoking pipes and speaking grave thoughts about protecting the free world. Peculiar times. But only a year after the Cuban Missile Crisis and not long after the communist witch hunts, perhaps we ought not to be surprised about this battle to maintain what was doubtless considered normal and forever. Probably. All those average families living in average neighbourhoods probably sat around nodding their heads sagely and agreeing with every word in that lost world of what is now considered the type of ordinary suburban America that they seem so eager to try and recover. Not an equal world, of course, especially if you weren't a Caucasian male of a certain age and attitude, but a world forged in the post-war economic and technological boom, when America really could make a decent enough claim that it was, in certain aspects anyway, the top nation in the world. Funnily enough, however, the forces of evil are to be found everywhere and seem hell-bent on bringing this wonderfully idyllic capitalist utopia crashing down around its ears. As the bloke painting the sign at the entrance to the Nelson Institute, obviously the few men who know about it are more numerous than they think, is a wrong un. And as the car carrying Nelson and Phillips pauses beneath him, using his spray gun, he paints a big old cross on the roof for evil reasons. An X marks the spot. That the big X he painted in the close-up doesn't really match the one on the location film doesn't really matter all that much, because our heroes are now, quite literally, marked men. And so, on one of those windy Californian roads pretty much designed for precisely this sort of melodramatic action sequence, our heroes come under attack from the type of helicopter that everyone seemed to get rather excited about in those days, because they were still a relatively new thing, and while some of the cutaway shots to the static copter shot on a soundstage somewhere fail to quite match the location work, and the dummy that falls into the sea when Nelson shoots one of the villains looks very much like the unconvincing dummy it is, the Sea View loses its captain to enemy action, and with exploding cars and helicopters, the series can definitely be said to have started with a bang. And so we reach the opening titles, which are another memorable sequence of the kind that Irwin Allen's series did so well, even though it is mostly made up of stock footage of that terribly impressive model of the Sea View and a couple of custom shot sequences featuring the main cast, all backed with that memorably rousing nautical theme, which is very much in the tradition of the composers Khachaturian and Dvorak, and is consequently very traditional, if not old-fashioned, considering it was made in the era of rock and roll and the birth of the Beatles. Indeed, this world we are being introduced to is extraordinarily traditional in a United States military kind of a way, despite the fact that great pains are taken to point out that this submarine, armed as it is with nuclear missiles and a lot of other sophisticated weaponry, is actually supposed to be a civilian outfit. The style of the filming and that music reminds the viewer very much of those look at the world in awe and wonder short films that often used to accompany the cinema releases of the time, and this is, of course, not surprising. The underwater world of Jacques Cousteau and documentary filmmakers like Ivan Tors and the wonderful world of the Disney Corporation would have been a huge influence and very probably taught a lot of the people working on this show much of what they knew. It might also explain the more stilted aspects of the screenplay, as the characters often created for such documentaries were seldom written as anything more than ciphers. That said, the crew of the Sea View would develop over the course of the 4 series, as the actors created those familiar television characters that people came to love watching. So we do have to give them a lot of credit for making the most of what they were given to work with. The other interesting aspect of those iconic opening titles is the effusive voiceover that returns and manages to repeat the title of the programme twice within the space of less than 30 seconds, whenever the caption in that beautifully rendered, iconic wibbly-wobbly typeface appears. And in the tradition of American dramatic series of this sort, at that time it assumes that nobody can read and feels the need to read everything out loud for the benefit of those of us at home. Later series would add a memorable radar scope graphic over the montage of impressive model shots of that fabulous submarine, but we're a long way from that as yet. Meanwhile, back at the plot, we are greeted by the sort of thing that's going to become very familiar to viewers of this show over the years, a montage of stock footage of storms and other freak weather events, including a reasonable model shot of a dam breaking, presumably nicked from a film, all of which are in black and white, which might explain a lot of why the transmitted episode also would be. Admiral Nelson is addressing the full council and is putting forward his plan to avert world disaster, as 2 massive Arctic earthquakes have been predicted to occur in 11 days' time. And Nelson wants, predictably, to use a great big atom bomb to create a counterforce that would negate the effects of the earthquakes, or some such nonsense. They did like to show off their nukes and what they could do with them back then, didn't they? There's a lot of dodgy science being bandied around here, and respected actor Richard Basehart does sometimes give the air of wondering just what the hell he's got himself involved with here, but manages to do so with a certain amount of dignity and conviction. Anyway, If they don't do this, huge tidal waves would sweep down from the north apparently and obliterate life as we know it. Britain is basically wiped off the map in this scenario, by the way. We learn that the forces of evil, by which we must assume that he means those countries in that large landmass to the east, which is less likely to be troubled by those waves, are quite keen to let this happen and to destabilise life as we know it. Equally, to avoid mass panic, none of us are going to be told anything or evacuated to safe places or anything, which is just the kind of thinking almost designed to make a generation grow up feeling paranoid about the government and the military and the sort of shenanigans they get up to behind closed doors. Anyway, despite some toing and froing, Operation Counterforce is approved because Admiral Nelson says that it will work and that they have to act, and luckily, I suppose, the plan gets recommended for approval. After the meeting breaks up, they then have a brief chat about what a damn shame it was about Captain Forgettable, who got killed, and we hear a little bit about his requisitioned replacement, a certain Lee Crane, who's painted as a by-the-book kind of a guy, which is about the most actual characterization we'll ever get in this. Sadly, via a recorder placed in one of those exotic engraved gold cigarette boxes that you never see anymore, the forces of evil know all about what had happened in this secret meeting, and in their headquarters, the kind of bald villain brandishing a long cigarette holder and wearing a velvet smoking jacket is planning further evil actions. Those early Bond films do have a lot to answer for, don't they? In the super-secret dockyard, late at night, a sinister figure sneaks aboard the Seaview and into the moodily red-lit inner corridors of the submarine. But phew! He's very quickly caught, and ha-ha! Despite all those sinister men in sinister headquarters, it's not a super sneaky evil spy at all, but the new captain testing the security, and he's not all that impressed, despite the fact that they caught him. Some people are never pleased, are they? Still, this sets up a certain amount of edginess between him and the crew, which means that, as per the rules of such things, he needs to prove himself to be an okay guy before the episode is over. The crew at this point includes Henry Culkey playing Chief Curly Jones, who would only feature in the first season as he would die of a heart attack before the Seaview returned to full colour. His replacement would be Chief Sharkey, played with a light and sweaty touch by Terry Becker for the rest of the run, and it is his chief that people remember more. As well as the eternally put-upon Kowalski, other regular crew members included the eternally cool Bob Dowdell as Chip Morton. I always liked Chip. Paul Trinker as Patterson, Arch Whiting as the ever-busy and well-named Sparks, Alan Hunt as Seaman Riley, and Richard Bull as the ship's no-nonsense doctor. Other crewmen would come and go, but they were the main regulars in an unusually all-male and very waspish cast. We are also introduced at this point to the terse Dr. Fred Wilson, played with a certain brusqueness by this week's special guest star, Eddie Albert, the best diver on the boat. And whilst the language is very clipped, this boys' club doesn't feature any women at all in this episode, though it wasn't an exclusive boys' club, as there would be female guest stars, although, like with other matters of diversity, there would be very few and far between. Anyway, pretty soon the sub is at sea, and despite the crew and the ship both being considered expendable, Chip continues plotting courses and the action moves to that front observation deck set with those massive viewing windows, which remain one of the more memorable images associated with the series, and Nelson and Crane can share what passes for some matey, mutually respectful dialogue, which underscores how heroic they all are, and whilst they all try to smoke themselves to death in a strangely huge-seeming environment that probably could do without all that smoke hanging around, they decide not to tell the crew everything about this top-secret mission, as they don't want to be aboard a floating pressure cooker full of chaps worrying about silly stuff like families and whatnot, a notion that would resurface in Crimson Tide a couple of decades later. Night falls, and with the first proper shudder of the series, not a full-on rock and roll, like the kids would play in the school playground after watching this that the show became famous or notorious for, we get the next full-on action sequence, which includes depth charges as they are attacked by an aircraft, and the top-secret nature of the mission is immediately revealed, causing certain supporting artists to display a certain amount of panic. Also, the sonar mast gets lost, requiring a lot of the cast, including the less than sylph-like Curly Jones, to get into their rubber gear in a range of colours including orange, yellow and black, and head outside via an airlock tube and not the usual studio tank in the middle of the set because they didn't have one, for an encounter with a giant octopus. truly everything from the film is being included in this episode. Anyway, Captain Crane is molested by the octopus and saved by the heroic, if not modest, Doctor, who also retrieved that lost sonar mast, and they must surface to make repairs via some impressive model shots of the submarine underneath the polar ice field. However, before we can draw breath, the torpedoes are incoming and they have to call battle stations and make a run for it, as another submarine is after them, albeit a submarine crewed by some of the stupidest villains in the evil world. So now we get some proper rocking and rolling as the torpedoes miss, but they are too close, and following the surprisingly Flash Gordon-y orders of the evil cabal, the other, inferior submarine dives far too deep in pursuit of Seaview and basically blows up. The Seaview is, of course, the far superior vessel and survives. Huzzah! The Seaview is now free to surface, and does so using that spectacular, if impractical, model shot of it erupting into a frozen sea at a 40-degree angle, and it is still a breathtakingly powerful image. Meanwhile, at Evil headquarters, they turn to their remote-controlled drones to make another attack, and this is when the modern viewer has to consider two things. First, that the idea of remote-controlled drones has been around for more than half a century, and second, maybe too many little girls and boys grew up watching this sort of stuff and decided to make them into real weapons of mass destruction. Anyway, we're at the North Pole, which is nicely realised despite a few obvious backdrops, and the submarine looks great in the snowscapes. The remaining part of the episode involves trying to deliver the atom bomb, because military might can basically solve any problem, boys and girls, to the appointed spot, an attack on his team in their snowcat, the first deadly earthquake actually happening for another prolonged rocking and rolling session from the cast, and a foolishly brave mission headed up by the stupendously brave Captain Crane, which succeeds, but well beyond the nick of time, and yet despite knowing that they've got a limited amount of time to get away before Wilson nukes the Arctic, no doubt causing a certain amount of global warming in an instant, chaps, he hangs on anyway in the belief that they will succeed in their rescue attempt. And of course, huzzah, they do! And they even manage to launch a missile to take out that pesky drone in the process, although those pesky evils in their lounge lizardy base are determined to return. Actually, in terms of building tension throughout this sequence, the episode does it surprisingly well. One thing Alan did well was build and pace a bit of sweaty tension, as anyone who's ever seen The Towering Inferno could no doubt testify. Anyway, with a cry of brace yourselves and a crash dive, a whole load of rock and rolling, and feet upon feet of stock footage of the Seaview being battered by chunks of undersea ice, the world, and happily, from a personal point of view, that includes tiny old Britain, is saved. And, over coffee and bickies in the observation deck, we learn that Captain Crane has been bunged out of the Navy to be made permanent captain of the Seaview, and they will be battling evils just so long as there are evils to be battled, or until 1968, whichever is sooner. Which calls for a resounding celebratory fanfare, and the pilot episode is over, and almost as dead a cert for a full series as you might ever see. There is something about all of the Irwin Allen productions that have a heightened sense of artificiality about them, as well as a slightly formulaic and perhaps stagey quality that's difficult to define, but which becomes more apparent when compared with other shows made around the same time. That said, a lot of American television drama series made before the 1980s do have a similar unreality about them, even the most urban of them, but that might go some way towards explaining their appeal and the fond memories certain generations have of them. Many of these shows were made to be watched by families, and as families we sat down and watched them, and perhaps that explains the good, warm, nostalgic feelings they can evoke in us, even now. Certainly my own early exposure to the adventures aboard the Seaview created interest for me in all kinds of dramas set on board submarines, and led me to enjoy some of my very favourite films, The Hunt for Red October, Das Boot, Crimson Tide, and the like, as well as all those stiff upper-lipped war movies made in the 1950s, and as a legacy, that's not half bad for a bit of hokum made in the mid-1960s, is it?
That was episode 48 of Round the Archives.
Starring Lisa Parker, Andrew Trowbridge, Paul Chandler, Toppie Smellie and Martin Holmes.
On the musical side, you heard Dan Tate and Paul Chandler.
The script for Goodies Rule OK was by Graham Garden and Bill Oddie.
And the producer was Jim Franklin.
Oh, he's probably just trying to win a prize.
He won't.
Anyway, now Paul and Toppie return to look at...
Well, sorry.
And now Paul and Toppie return to look at...
So I really can't remember what Twilight Zone.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, I didn't understand that.
Surrealism.
Too hot. It's a load of rubbish.